Hey everyone, welcome to the Evangelist Nick Garrett channel. Please subscribe, like, and share. I'm working real hard for you guys out there, and today, the First Crusade finally reaches the Holy Land. Be right back. The East and West reconciled to face Islam. But still, the politics between them were quite complicated. No one could predict exactly what a crusade might look like or what would happen as several fully provisioned Latin armies end up bivouacked outside the walls of Constantinople, especially after the People's Crusades. When Godfrey of Bouillon arrived with his brothers, there was some confusion. Trust had yet to be established, and it was still not exactly clear how expeditions into the field would be organized, who would lead them, and what the results would be. Sensing the tension between the camp outside the walls of the city and the walled defenses, skirmishers were deployed. There were tense moments for the two forces that would somehow have to work together, push back the Turks, and hand property back over to the Eastern Empire. When Alexios asked for Godfrey to come inside the city gates and before him in the palace, the fear of kidnapping for ransom was not entirely unfounded. Undoubtedly, the Byzantines also had the rabble of the People's Crusade fresh in their mind from the previous year. The court of the Emperor Alexios Comnenus and Godfrey's camp exchanged temporary hostages to ensure mutual protection as they met in the throne room. The arrival of the big Norman, Bohemund of Taranto, and his army did not help to ease the tension. While the least rich and powerful among the lords leading armies toward Constantinople, he had already proven an apt military tactician, a fact that Comnenus knew personally. For Bohemund, a crusade to the Holy Land was initially not his fight. He and the Normans had enough trouble at home. Further, the last thing they would want to do is go help the Byzantines with whom they had warred over parts of Italy. Still, impressed with the sight of disciplined and controlled crusaders passing through on their way to Constantinople, he was motivated to take up the cross himself. Bohemund's family had been close to the papacy in the West. It was they who had fought in the Norman-Byzantine wars on Sicily and protected papal lands, averting a catastrophe for the West. He had also learned a great deal and taken his lumps through a few tragic losses in the field. He and his younger brother Tancred took up the cross and set out with their Norman force toward Constantinople. Meanwhile, back in the Western Crusader camp outside Constantinople, tensions cooled. Godfrey met with Alexios I and pledged his loyalty to the emperor and agreed to respect Byzantium's boundaries, a fealty that the Lord Knight of each new Crusader force would have to claim before heading onward. One might consider this a shallow move on the part of Comnenus. It was he, after all, that had sent for help at Piacenza. However, each side had their own self-interest. Many thousands on both sides of Christendom had died fighting each other. In fact, some of the leaders of these Crusader armies themselves had at times been enemies of Alexios. It can't be overstated what a different way of thinking, preparing, and fighting this Crusader spirit was. All sides were asked to abandon their presuppositions, resentments, past wrongs, and to place some trust in each other. This in itself should display the lengths Christendom would go to in order to push back the Turks. It also demonstrates how effective the words of Pope Urban had been to effect real change in the Church. Armies moving peacefully across sovereign lands, respectfully and quietly, and old foes burying the hatchet for the mutual interest of their faith was quite unprecedented. Therefore, something as simple as an oath of fealty reduced tensions among the factions in the Eastern Court. It extended trust, and it gave great insight to subsequent generations as to just how important one's commitment and word were once given. A man's word was his bond, and even kings rested their laurels on having ascertained the right motive of lords and affirmation of loyalty to the crown of Constantinople. After making his oath, Godfrey of Bouillon set out to fight. 1096 came to an end, and within the first month of the new year, Bohemund and Tancred of Taranto arrived in the western camp outside Constantinople, finding the Emperor Alexios very nervous indeed. Bohemund presented himself as willingly loyal, but the emperor remained convinced Bohemund intended to use the crusade as a ruse to gain Byzantine land for the Normans. At the same time, Robert of Flanders, who had gone with Comnenus on an expedition against the Turks years earlier, arrived with his force just outside Constantinople. He presented himself formally, perhaps remembering their past mutual affections, and said to Comnenus that he was, quote, going to Jerusalem under the authority of the Apostolic See to liberate the Church of God, which had been trampled underfoot by savage peoples for a long time, end quote. His Flemish warriors would prove an asset, although it would take much longer than perhaps Robert of Flanders or anyone thought it would to simply get to Jerusalem. The tone of Flanders' words, however, shed great insight. Do they show the naivete and high idealistic intention of the undertaking? And that these men were about to find out crusading was not as easy as some thought, even with God's divine intervention. Long before glory awaited them, blistering heat, unquenchable thirst, dehydration, heat stroke, starvation, and navigating rugged mountain overpasses, all while horses dropped with broken legs and hunger and under constant attack from barbarian Muslim raiders. Flanders would need all the idealism he could muster to keep up the spirits of his men. Next to arrive among the gathering collection of Western warrior armies was Raymond, the 4th Count of Toulouse, the first proud southern Frenchman to have taken up the cross. He galloped toward the city camp with his large and well-supplied army. Raymond met with the emperor and was quite impressed with him. The sources of the period spend a great deal of time revealing the interactions between these two as unique and impressive. Raymond and Alexios engaged in long discussions, finding a spirit of openness among themselves that certainly Comnenus had not expected. It may have even blossomed into friendship. Alexios was attracted to what seemed to be Raymond's purity and grasp of the spiritual aspect of Western Crusade thinking. It went so far beyond military conquest for him. In fact, it wasn't conquest at all. The lands the Crusaders began strategizing to take back were all, without exception, Christian or Jewish in origin, until the Prophet Muhammad's second generation of caliphs used Islam to dominate and subjugate all non-Muslims. The lands of the Bible were mostly fallen within only a century. Alexios I's primary concern was gaining commitments to respect Byzantine land boundaries and getting on the public record promises from each Crusader lord to respect his authority and boundaries. Raymond had some concerns of his own. He was intent on making sure that Alexios would fully commit to the field, just as all these groups of men arriving even as they spoke would be doing. In Western words, he wanted Alexios I Comnenus to take up the cross himself. In order to do so, though, Comnenus would have to leave the city and take its most able fighters and accoutrements of war with them. To take up the cross in the form of a declaration could also be viewed as the long-desired deference to Rome that the papacy desired. It would be the Eastern Emperor going along with a program of Western design and maybe glory. The emperor personally leaving Constantinople was quite the leap of faith, and unfortunately for the fragile diplomacy of East and West, a tense and disheartening decision not to go that would influence later events in the First Crusade. Alexios, still wanting to show that good had come from the connection he had made with Raymond, and for that matter, Pope Urban, he accepted a modified oath from Raymond that he would simply respect the Byzantine landholdings. Alexios' soft commitment did create some tension, to say it lightly. The whole crusade was set on the fact that at Piacenza, Alexios had sent dignitaries asking for help. Pope Urban, seeing the opportunity to unite East and West among other things, responded. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to talking to you next time when our Crusaders are going to take the field and attempt to take back Nicaea. Talk to you next time.